Hello, everybody. We are going to get started here. Make sure everything looks good. Hey. So I hope you can hear me okay. We changed up a bit of the audio stuff from last month to this month, but I'm assuming that you can. My name is Danny MacDonald. I am the newsletter editor for the Oklahoma City Astronomy Club, and welcome to our February club meeting. As you can tell, we are virtual again this month. I am going to let Chuck talk a little bit about why that is, but for once in 2 years, it's not specifically because of COVID. So progress, maybe, kind of. It was still kind of COVID, but that was, yeah. So, speaking of Chuck, I'm just gonna go ahead and play this video of Chuck's for you guys. Chuck is our president. He every month he gets the invites to be on these meetings with me and Eileen and with our guest speaker, but I think he has like a court order or something that says he's not allowed to be on the same Zoom call as me. So I'm going to play this video from our president, and I will see you guys in about 5 minutes with some clubs with some club news and updates, and we have a great guest speaker for you that we'll talk about. But for now, here is Chuck.
Hi, this is Chuck Rice, president of the Oklahoma City Astronomy Club, and I'd like to welcome you to this month's meeting. Obviously, we are meeting virtually through YouTube. Many thanks to Danny McDonald for setting that up. If you love these presentations and you love the meeting, give all those compliments to Danny. If you love the president's message that I do every month, you give those compliments to me. But if you hate my message and wish it would go away, well, you should talk to Danny about it because they're all his idea. He sent me an email this morning begging me to please submit a video, and so that's what I'm doing now. It's a pleasure taking time out of my day to talk to you guys because I like to talk about astronomy, and it gets me out of the work that I need to be doing instead, some boring paperwork that I didn't want to do anyway, but that's okay. You don't want to hear about that. If you're aware of the discussion board, we have lots of events on the discussion board at okcastroclub.com and a lot of things going on and events, so I encourage you to check that out. Unfortunately, one of the things that occurred recently was the recent passing of an early club member, Clive Cadle. I never met Clive, but there's been a lot of good things posted about him on the discussion board, and we wish his family all the best, and they are in our hearts and thoughts at this time. I should note that, he was an early member of the club and was very influential on a lot of club members. And if you're aware, we offer every year the E.K. Owen Award for outstanding contributions to astronomy, especially the Oklahoma City Astronomy Club. And we've given out that award 36 times. Well, Clive was the third recipient of that award. So you can imagine in the early days of the award, they had the club, they had many vibrant members. Who were they going to select? He was selected in the third year. So he's made a lot of contributions, and those early contributions are the foundation of what we have now. And so we do appreciate him and what he has done. And those, spirit of giving and contributing continues to this day. So we've had lots of members contribute ideas and do things. Several years ago, we had an effort among club members to get a state astronomical object, the Roadside Nebula. One of the few states, or maybe the only state in the nation to have this. Well, the other day I got an email from the Los Angeles Astronomical Society, and they're wanting to know how we did this. How did the club get a state astronomical object named? Because the Los Angeles Astronomical Society is wanting to do the same thing in the state of California. And guess what? They want to nominate the California Nebula as the state astronomical object. So it's really cool that, you know, our efforts and what you guys do as club members is having an impact across the nation. And I'm sure, you know, throughout the world, even if you don't know it right away. So we'll keep you updated and see how that goes in California, but we wish them all the best. Our meeting tonight is going to be from Nate Cabe from University of Oklahoma Department of Physics and Astronomy, and he's going to be talking about comets. And you know, comets are a temporary thing in the universe. They come, they go. They break up and so forth. So it'll be pretty interesting to learn about comets and their fleeting time that we get to see and observe them. And you know, one of the reasons that we're doing internet or YouTube meeting is because Dr. Cabe is away in Ohio right now. But the other reason is that tonight the Science Museum is hosting 300 people, and we were going to be stuck in the Goldman room. That's great, except we weren't sure what the internet quality was going to be like in the Goldman room. So it turns out we decided just to move everything online. So hopefully we can get back together next month. We'll have our technology figured out. We can test that, and hopefully the COVID numbers will be a little bit better next month, and things will be a little bit safer. And finally, if you check your email and your email junk folders, you can look for your Astronomy Club renewal notice. So I got mine the other day. So please renew your membership. We have a vibrant club. I talked earlier about how the club can do all these great things that affect people around the world. That's because of you and the contributions that you make. So please renew your club membership. Get that done as soon as possible, just so you don't forget about it. And yeah, as soon as I hang up here, I'm going to do my club membership renewal myself. So it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to tonight's meeting, and thanks everybody for coming. All right, bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. I'm not sure if begging is the word that I would use to get him to do these videos. Like, I think that counts as like doing your job, doing the bare minimum, but maybe he was too busy not cleaning his office to want to record a video. Some points of note from that video for first of all about why virtual this month, and that's just because the Science Museum has a lot of people in it tonight. Sometimes they rent the museum out, and sometimes when they do that, it conflicts with our meeting, and sometimes it's not a big deal. But tonight, since our speaker is in Ohio, it just made sense to just do it like this. Chuck mentioned a Mr. Cadle in his video that unfortunately passed away recently. If you would like to read the wonderful things that people have been posting about him, please go to our web forum and check that out. And I will have instructions on how to get to the forum later on if you don't know how to do that. California has joined the bandwagon. It's not very often that you can say that Oklahoma is a trendsetter and it be a good thing. So it's really cool that California saw saw what we did with the state astronomical object, and now they are trying to do the same thing. Thanks to Bill Merle, Christian, who managed to push that through and have been working on it for years and years, and we got that done a few years ago. So that is really cool that Oklahoma has the Rosette as the state astronomical object, and soon California will be joining us with the California Nebula. Let's hope. I am going to. So one thing that Chuck also said is that member renewals have gone out. Check your email, check your spam folder. There is a link in there that you can use to pay online. If you want to do that, dues are due by April 1st. Someone in chat can correct me if it's March, but I think it's April. But yeah, if you need to do that and you didn't get the email even after checking your spam and all that stuff, then you can email us at webmaster@okcastroclub.com and we can see what is going on with that. Coming up, we've got some club events. Starting tomorrow, the day after right now, we have a novice session that was supposed to be last month, but it got clouded out or the weather was bad. So that is tomorrow out at Lake Stanley Draper. We do these once a quarter as we can because of the weather and stuff. These are great events to, if you don't know how to use your telescope, or if you don't know what you want to get, or maybe you have a piece of equipment that you don't know what it does or whatever. These are great events to come out to. And it's free. It's free. The only downside is you have to drive out to Stanley Draper, and for me that's like 45 minutes. Yeah, more information on where exactly to go is on our website, which I will show you towards the end of the meeting when I do my wrap up there. We have a couple of member nights before the next club meeting. The 26th of February and March the 5th. If you don't know what Cheddar Ranch is, if you're new to these, that is our private club observatory. It is about an hour and a half outside of Oklahoma City. It's a great spot. If you are a member of the club, or if you're just a guest and you want to go, let us know that you are interested, and we will make arrangements with you. Because if you've never been out there before, it's kind of hard to find. But it's a great site. There's plumbing, and there's Wi-Fi, and there's heat and air, and there's plenty of wide open space to set up your telescopes. If you don't have a telescope, there are 2 permanent scopes there that if the weather is nice, and then people might get those out and set those up. One of which is our 30-inch Kirkpatrick telescope that is enormous and wonderful, and was our big club project from a few years ago. And late next month, on the 26th, is our first scheduled date for the Messier Marathon. If you don't know what that is, if you don't know what Messier objects are, if you're brand new, this would be a great thing to go to. For those that don't know, the Messier, it's a guy's name, a guy named Messier. Back in the day, I don't know exactly the year, but he scanned the sky and found 100 plus of the brightest night sky objects and put them together into a catalog. There are just a few nights a year where you can see all 110 of them in one night. So that's what a marathon is you can go out to CRO and you can see all of them, and you can see all of them in one night. So that's a great thing. See lots of beautiful stuff. Lots of the biggest and brightest stuff in the sky, and that's a great thing to go to. Okay, so that is enough of me talking. I'm just going to look at chat, see if I missed anything here. Looks good. Okay. So let's get to our club speaker. Dr. Nathan Cabe is coming to us live over this series of tubes that we call the internet. And I'm going to throw it over to our wonderful program director, Eileen, who will give him a proper introduction. Eileen? Oh, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. I muted so that we don't have any chance of feedback. First of all, before I get going on introducing our speaker, I just wanted to let you know that next month on Friday the 11th, our speaker is a friend of mine, a lady astrophotographer. Her name is Samara Nagel. She also happens to be coming from Ohio. I met Sam as part of the ASIP program, the Astronomy in Chile Education Ambassadors Program. Sam is not a traditional educator. What she does is she educates by moderating the Telescope Addicts in Astronomy and Astrophotography Facebook group, that whole community. And she has her own journey into how she became an astrophotographer. So with that said, I'm happy to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Nate Cabe is from the OU Physics and Astronomy Department. Danny was mentioning Messier comets, Messier objects. Well, Charles Messier was a comet hunter. He really wanted to become famous by having lots of comets named after himself. And so he made this Messier list of 110 objects that were dim fuzzies that were not comets because they didn't move and parallax shift in the night sky. I was disappointed. I was always, as a kid, I knew that Halley's Comet was coming back in 84 and 85. And I was so disappointed because that was just not my favorite comet. I had waited a lifetime and I kept hoping I would see some, and he's going to show you some pictures of even more recent ones that definitely got my attention. My students were telling me they were out running and they said, "Hey, we saw this thing hanging in the sky. It looked like a saber. Could that have been a comet?" And I was crossing the bridge at Lindsay Street going west and I went, "That's a comet." That definitely was one naked eye. And I hope everybody gets a chance to see something like that. Nate is going to speak to us tonight about the recently discovered fading of the most distant comets. So with that introduction, I turn it over to Dr. Nate Cabe and thank him for his willingness to Zoom with us.
Oh, well, thank you for the invitation. and yeah, so let's get started so I can share my screen. Here we go. And let me start the slideshow. Okay, yeah. Title of my talk tonight is Comet Fading Begins Beyond Saturn. And this is work that I've actually just been working on and just got accepted for publication in Science Advances, and it should be coming out should be published in the next 1 to 2 months. And so this is a picture of Comet McNaught, taken about 12 to 15 years ago. I can't remember the exact date. Yeah, it was a brilliant comet that you can see with the naked eye, a long period comet as well. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on tonight. So we can get started so this is an outline of my talk. I'm going to begin. So a lot of this is very much background knowledge for you guys, but I'm going to begin just with the primer of the solar system and also discussion of orbits. And then I'm going to delve into one particular part of the solar system that I'm interested in, the Oort cloud and long period comets that are associated with the Oort cloud. I'm going to talk about the dynamics of those bodies and how their orbits change over time. Then I'm going to focus on one particular group of long period comets that I've become very interested in that I call distant long period comets. And I'm going to talk about evidence for their fading over time. And then I'll finish with some conclusions and if we have time, future work. This is not news to anybody in this group, but this is an overview of our solar system. The sun is the most massive object. It sits at the center. And then we have our 4 inner small rocky planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. And then moving further out, we have the giant planets in the outer solar system. And of course, the solar system consists of more than just the sun and planets. We have lots of small bodies. And so in this diagram right here, we have 2 reservoirs of small bodies. We have the asteroid belt that sits between Mars and Jupiter, consisting mostly of small rocky objects. And then we have the Kuiper belt sitting beyond Neptune, consisting of smaller icy bodies. And tonight I'll be talking about distances between these objects, and I'll be using mostly the AU as our distance of our unit of distance. So 1 AU by definition is the distance between the Earth and the sun. And so the edge of our solar system that normally gets talked about is Neptune, sitting at 30 AU, so 30 times as far from the sun. But I'm going to be focusing again on much more distant parts of the solar system. So here's a scaled or a logarithmically scaled diagram showing distances to different parts of the solar system. So I'm going to be focusing on the Oort cloud, which orbits between roughly 1,000 and 100,000 AU. So much, much further from the sun than the Earth is. When discussing the Oort cloud and long period comets, I'm mostly going to be focused on their orbits. And so I just want to go over some jargon again that most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, but I just want to repeat it so we're all on the same page. So one property of orbits that I'm going to be discussing a lot tonight is the eccentricity of orbits. So eccentricity is just a parameter that basically describes their degree of circularity. Eccentricity can run from 0 to 1. An eccentricity near 0 means that the orbit is nearly a perfect circle. And then as eccentricity approaches 1, the orbit gets more and more elongated. An eccentricity of 1, it corresponds actually to a parabolic orbit rather than an elliptical orbit. Now, if you have a moderately eccentric orbit, the sun, of course, doesn't sit at the center of the ellipse. It's offset from the center. It sits at a focus of the ellipse. And if you add on all angles, you'd find that the average distance is equal to the semi-major axis of the ellipse, which we generally represent with the lowercase a as a variable. And then the distance of closest approach in an eccentric orbit is called the perihelion, which we use a lowercase q for that. And then oops, that's weird. That should not say v. That should say the aphelion is the furthest distance that an object gets from the sun. I must have accidentally typed there. But that's the aphelion. That's less important for this talk, but I just put in there for inclusion. And then the other thing I want to talk about is the inclination of orbits. So any orbit defines a plane in 3D space. If you measure the inclination between the plane defined by the orbit and some reference plane, that's the inclination of the orbit. That angles the inclination. So the typical reference plane in our solar system are the orbits of the planets because they all lie nearly the same plane. So that's not true of the small bodies. So when we talk about things like comets or Oort cloud orbits, we will often discuss their inclination relative to the plane of the planets. Okay, so if you actually look at the inclinations of all known comets and plot them against their orbital period, you see a transition as you approach shorter and shorter periods. Basically, if you look at comets with long periods, say longer than 200 years, the inclinations are all over the place. But then if you look at comets that have shorter periods, the inclinations are clustered closer to zero, between like 0 and 40 degrees or so. So the low inclination ones are called short period comets. These are comets that have periods below 200 years. It's thought that most of these come from a portion of the Kuiper belt known as the scattered disk. I'm not really going to discuss that today. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on the long period comets. And they have a lot of different inclinations. And those are the comets that we believe come from the Oort cloud. So those comets have all inclinations, and the Oort cloud was proposed to exist fairly recently in terms of scientific history by Oort, the cloud's namesake, in 1950. And so now I want to talk a little bit more about how the orbits of the Oort cloud and long period comets change over time. So again, the Oort cloud is very far from the sun, thousands of times farther from the sun than the Earth is. It's comprised largely of objects with sizes of order a kilometer across. And so observing these things directly in the Oort cloud is virtually impossible, and we've never done it. And so the reason that we know that the Oort cloud exists is we see long period comets, and we know that long period comets are short-lived. They exhaust their supply of volatiles, volatile ices, and their orbits are dynamically unstable. So there has to be some large reservoir steadily resupplying them, and that's what the Oort cloud is. And so the way that we get new long period comets from the Oort cloud, the reason that we get new ones is because the Oort cloud, unlike most of the rest of the solar system, is actually sensitive to gravitational perturbations from the larger galaxy, our larger galaxy, so the Milky Way. And those perturbations manifest themselves in two main ways. The first way is simply other stars fly past our solar system. So, the sun and other stars are all on orbits around the galactic center. They're not all on perfectly circular orbits, so they all have small relative velocities, and occasionally two stars will come close together, one of those stars being our sun. So when a star flies past the sun, it exerts a torque on Oort cloud orbits, and that torque can pull their perihelion away, or it can push it closer to the sun. Now, occasionally you can have a stellar encounter. You can have a stellar encounter configured with an Oort cloud orbit, where after the encounter, the Oort cloud orbit is driven to an extremely high eccentricity and a very low perihelion, and all of a sudden, this icy body that's been sitting in an extremely cold region of the solar system comes near the sun and gets heated up for the first time in billions of years. Ice is sublimate off of its surface, and you see, because of that, you develop a cometary activity and cometary tail, and you see a beautiful comet in the night sky. This one shown right here is Comet Hale-Bopp from 1997, I believe. So that's one way that the Oort cloud is perturbed and produces new long period comets. The other way is actually due to the larger scale structure of our Milky Way. So the Milky Way is a spiral galaxy. It has a disc-like shape, and the solar system is part of that disk. Now, if we zoom, this is an image of the Milky Way's disk made from 2-mass data. If we zoom in on a portion of the disk, you can imagine this. There's the sun, and there's an Oort cloud object. If they have slightly different heights above the midplane of the galaxy, the gravitational pull of the midplane pulls them down at different accelerations. So in the reference frame of the solar system, what that manifests itself as is a tidal force. There's an acceleration on comets that is different than the acceleration on the sun. And so you get this relative acceleration. And basically what this is an acceleration that's in addition to so the comet feels an acceleration that's in addition to the acceleration from the sun's gravity. So we call that a non-Keplerian acceleration, since it's not coming from a central mass. And since it's non-Keplerian acceleration, this causes Oort cloud orbits to move on non-Keplerian orbits, which means their ellipses aren't closed over time. So over time, their perihelia and their inclinations oscillate very slowly. And so this can also, it can lower the perihelion of Oort cloud objects till they're coming very close to the sun, and it can produce new long period comets as well. And so it was just realized that fairly recently, in the mid 80s, that this tidal perturbation was important for Oort cloud dynamics. And it was actually shown that it's on average, it's about twice as strong as the stellar perturbations on the Oort cloud. So this is actually the dominant effect, the dominant driver of Oort cloud dynamics. So as I said, the only information we have on the Oort cloud, for the most part, comes from long period comets. And we've been discovering new long period comets for well over 100 years. And so what's being plotted right here is from a 2017 paper. It's every comet that's been discovered, every long period comet that's been discovered. So the perihelion of each of those comets is plotted versus their year of discovery. And what you'll notice is that almost all the perihelia are in the inner few AU of the solar system. So that those perihelia dominate the comet catalog. And there's a few reasons for that. One is just any object is easier to see closer to the sun for two reasons. One, it appears bigger from the Earth. Two, it reflects a lot more sunlight. But then comets, the bias is even stronger because as a comet gets closer and closer to the sun, its surface gets hotter, which makes it more active, which also makes it much more visible. So there's this extremely strong bias in our comet catalog towards finding things with low perihelion within the inner few AU of the solar system. So if we look at all those comets that have been found and we make a histogram of their semi-major axes, so this is their average distance from the sun averaged over their whole orbit, what you see is that it's not a uniform distribution. And this was first identified by Oort in 1950. He noticed that there was this large spike of semi-major axes beyond about 10,000 AU. You're more likely to have semi-major axes in that range than any other range. And so this is referred to as the Oort spike. And based on his work, we now refer to these comets, these particular long period comets, as new comets. And so we think that these and only these comets are newly arrived from the Oort cloud. So they're making their first passage near the sun when we discover them. And so our general idea is that if you are a new long period comet, so you come in on your way into the inner solar system, there's no getting around it. You're going to encounter the giant planets on your way in, and those giant planets will give a comet little kicks of energy, and in particular Jupiter will. So Jupiter's the most massive planet. It gives the strongest energy kicks. Those energy kicks can do one of two things to this long period comet as it makes its first traverse of the inner solar system. Either Jupiter will give energy to this long period comet and will cause its orbit to become unbound. So it'll leave the solar system on a hyperbolic orbit. It changes it from negative to positive energy and never comes back again. So that can happen. Then we'll never see that new long period comet again. On the other hand, Jupiter can also take energy away. And in that case, the orbit becomes more tightly bound. And next time the object comes around, we'll see it on a smaller semi-major axis. And so because of that, we think that the Oort spike is comprised of new long period comets. And the rest of these comets we refer to as returning comets. So these are new long period comets that avoided ejection on their first pass through the solar system, and they're returning on more tightly bound orbits with lower semi-major axes. So again, just to summarize, so Oort noted that comets with semi-major axes beyond about 10,000 AU are overrepresented. And the impressive thing is he did this with really only 19 comets with well-defined orbits. So based on that, he surmised that the Oort cloud, and the most distant part of the solar system, must extend at least 10,000 AU beyond the sun. And so, it actually goes out, based on these long period comet orbits, it goes out to tens of thousands of AU, perhaps even 100,000 AU. But you'll notice that the Oort spike effectively ends at 10,000 AU. So does that mean that the Oort cloud has an inner boundary right at 10,000 AU and there's nothing else inside of that boundary? It's probably not true. And the reason for that, again, has to do with the giant planets, Jupiter and Saturn. And so imagine we're oops, sorry, I didn't want to start that animation yet. Imagine we're looking at an Oort cloud object that's destined to become a long period comet that's observed from the Earth. And so in order for us to see this object, to discover it as a long period comet, its perihelion has to move in towards the Earth to get into the inner solar system. So let's imagine it hasn't gotten to that point. So the perihelion is somewhere in the outer solar system. And this comet makes a perihelion passage through the outer solar system. And then just in a single revolution around the sun, the perihelion quickly moves in. And by the time this comet comes around again, the perihelion's moved in towards the sun, and the comet comes through the inner solar system, and we discover it as a new long period comet. So that's a success case. But not every comet can do that. Not every Oort cloud object can do that. So now imagine that we start off with the same scenario. So we have a long period comet. It makes a perihelion passage in the outer solar system. But now imagine instead that this comet's orbit evolves more slowly. So in a single revolution around the sun, the perihelion doesn't move from the outer solar system to the inner solar system. Instead, it just moves a little bit in. Say it moves in from like 15 AU to say 8 AU. So it's between Jupiter and Saturn. In this case, the comet comes in and it's still too far away from us to have a good chance of discovering it. But it comes in and it feels a strong perturbation from Jupiter. That perturbation is going to do one of two things. It'll either shrink the orbit to the point where galactic perturbations can't cause any orbital changes, or it will eject it onto a hyperbolic orbit and the comet will never come back. It'll leave the solar system and float around interstellar space. So in that case, we will have never been able to discover that particular comet. So in order for us to actually discover long period comets, they have to have a fast rate of perihelion shift. They have to go from, their perihelion has to move from beyond Saturn to inside Jupiter in a single orbital period. And it turns out that the rate of perihelion shift depends strongly on semi-major axes. So the further you are from the sun, the more sensitive you are to those perturbations from the galaxy that drive perihelion shifts. So this prevents comets from entering the inner solar system if they have semi-major axes below 10,000 AU. So those orbits that are that small just can't evolve quickly enough to hop over Jupiter in a single orbit. So this explains why all new long period comets that we see from Earth have semi-major axes over 10 to the 4 AU or 10,000 AU. However, this still doesn't fully account for the prominence of the Oort spike. So again, this is what the observed data is. If we look at all the known long period comets and look at their distribution of semi-major axes, this is the form of the histogram that you see. So it's pretty straightforward to simulate this process in a numerical simulation. So I can construct an Oort cloud in a computer simulation, and I can mimic the perturbations on it from passing stars and the galactic tide. And I can also include the perturbations from the giant planets. And then I can watch which objects get injected into the inner solar system. And I can measure their semi-major axes as they come through. And this is the distribution you get in a simulation. So you'll notice that there is an Oort spike, but it's very modest compared to the real catalog. In the simulated catalog, returning comets dominate by a lot. So they're much more prominent than the Oort spike itself. This is not what we see in the observed data. So the most common comet semi-major axis is 30,000 AU. In the simulated data, it's under 1,000 AU. So the Jupiter-Saturn barrier can explain the existence of an Oort spike, but it can't explain how prominent it is. And Oort realized this very quickly after the 1950 paper. He and another astronomer named Schmidt published a follow-up in 1951 where they basically commented on the fact that the Oort spike is much, much bigger than it should be just based on pure dynamics alone. And what they concluded was that new comets must be much more likely to be discovered than returning comets. And the reason they put forth is this is due to the physical aging of comets as they make more and more passages by the sun, because each time they go by the sun, the reason we see them is they release all these volatiles that are sublimated, but those come primarily from their surface. So each time they go by, they lose some of that inventory of surface volatiles. And over time, a comet that's been depleted in surface volatiles simply is not going to have enough, nearly as much activity. It won't be as bright, and we're more likely to miss it. And so this process where comets physically age, and it could also be from fragmenting or something like that. There are astronomers that have written about that. But this process of comets physically aging and losing and having diminished activity is called fading. And so as comets make successive perihelion passages near the sun, they fade over time. And so this is generally how we think this works. So again, I'll return to my kind of prototypical example. So we have a comet that's destined to become, we have an Oort cloud object that's destined to become an observed long period comet. Comes through in the outer solar system, somewhere beyond Saturn. Its orbit evolves really quickly in a single orbital period. The perihelion moves in, and then it comes through as a new long period comet. We see it, but it is perturbed by Jupiter onto a much smaller semi-major axis orbit. And now it enters again with a smaller semi-major axis, but it's lost some surface volatiles, so it's not nearly as bright, and it comes through the solar system. And this time, and since it's not nearly as bright, we're less likely to discover it. And so that contributes to the relative prominence of the Oort spike of new long period comets compared to returning comets. And so this process of comet fading has been modeled. You can basically apply it to simulations, and it does a pretty good job of explaining the results. So this is from a paper from 2 years ago by Vokrlicki et al. In 2019, where they effectively simulated the production of long period comets in the inner few AU of the solar system. And they assumed that the comet's survival, or really its detectability, is proportional to the number of passages it's made within 3 AU of the sun, some negative exponent. And those colored lines are the results from their simulations with different fading laws applied. So you can see that they can reproduce the qualitative form of the observations really well with a certain exponent, negative 0.4. And so everything about comet fading is geared towards passages within 3 AU. Some other papers tie it to passages within 2 AU, but the point is that most work studying comet fading tailor everything to the number of passages inside 2 to 3 AU, which makes sense physically, since this is where water begins to sublimate. If you take ice and stick it at 1.5 AU, it'll begin to sublimate and turn into a gas. If you stick it at 5 AU, it's not going to do that. And so this would, since water vapor is thought to drive comet activity, it makes sense that this is what we should be paying attention to. So now I want to kind of summarize what our current observational sample of long period comets and the state of them. So again, the current sample of long period comets is dominated by comets with perihelia between 0 to 4 AU. And these comets, we know, their observed distribution is greatly distorted by comet fading, as well as the gravitational effects of the Jupiter-Saturn barrier. And because of that, the current long period comet sample can only provide us limited information about the details of the Oort cloud structure. So it tells us that the Oort cloud exists, but it doesn't exactly tell us how the material is distributed within the Oort cloud, what its inner boundary is, and really what its outer boundary is either. And so for a long time, we've really been interested in developing a sample of long period comets with perihelion that are further out, say near or even beyond Saturn. These are comets I would call distant long period comets. So that because they should be much less affected by these processes. So they're further away from Jupiter. They've yet to encounter Jupiter. And they don't come as near to the sun. So they're not going to be, so their water won't have been sublimated yet. So since I've been in grad school, I went to grad school from 2003 to 2010, all of the hopes about long period comets have been pinned on the Vera C. Rubin Observatory, which will be coming in line in the next 1 to 2 years. It's going to image the entire sky every few weeks. It'd be great at finding very faint things that move around the sun. So it'll find a lot of distant long period comets. And if you read any kind of Oort cloud or long period comet paper, they almost always end with, okay, we don't know much now, but we'll know a lot once this observatory comes online. That's where I'm going to switch gears and talk about these distant long period comets, because I was just looking through the comet catalog, and you can even see it on this plot. So everybody's been waiting for the Vera C. Rubin discoveries, but you can see that we're already getting a kind of a glimpse of what could be there. So if you look at the upper bound over these red dots, so these are all the comets that have been discovered over the years. If you look, the upper bound, the maximum perihelion that we're finding these things at, steadily increases over the decades. And if you look at the year 2000, we're starting to find things out near Saturn. So here's the Saturn semi-major axis for reference. So it's 9.5 AU. And even in this plot, we know of something like 8 or 10 comets. And now if you go and look at the JPL small body database, we now have 25 long period comets with perihelia between 8 and 12 AU. So we're not awesome at finding long period comets near Saturn with perihelion near Saturn, but we're approaching being okay at it. So 25 is, that's starting to become a robust statistical sample. And so I just wanted to see what it looked like. And so I'm wanted to see how it compared to the sample inside in the inner solar system. So again, just to refresh your memory, this is the historical catalog of comets. If we look at stuff that comes within 4 AU of the solar system, you can see that there's the prominent Oort spike that I talked about. Now we can compare that with the 25 comets that have been found with perihelion near Saturn. So this is really surprising because you'll notice that the Oort spike does not go away at all. In fact, it might even be more prominent. So the Oort spike's still there. Remember, our story for the Oort spike is driven by the effects of water sublimation and Jupiter's gravitational perturbations. So that should not be affecting this other sample of comets. So this is the complete opposite of what we'd expect, which is pretty wild, I think. I don't know. And so the first thing I thought of is there something special about the Oort cloud structure? Could this just be a symptom of we have a really different structure of the Oort cloud than we thought? So what I did is I basically designed to see if this could explain it. I designed an Oort cloud that could optimize the production of large semi-major axis long period comets and minimize the production of shorter semi-major axis long period comets. So basically all I did is I hollowed out the Oort cloud. I only populated it with comets on semi-major, or with objects on semi-major axes between 20,000 and 50,000 AU. And so that's really highly idealized and runs counter to most ideas about what the Oort cloud looks like. Even with this kind of odd assumption, it fails horribly at reproducing the observation. So here's it. So on the left is the results of my simulations. So these are all the comets in my simulations that passed through the solar system on perihelion between 8 and 12 AU. So that's the red dotted line there. So that's the cumulative distribution of their semi-major axis. And you can compare that with the observed distribution. That's the gray solid line. So this simulation fails horribly. It predicts that 96% of the distant long period comets should have semi-major axes below 10,000 AU. And in reality, only 24% do. And that's kind of a best case scenario. The problem would be much worse if we used a more plausible Oort cloud structure that was filled with smaller semi-major axes, bodies on smaller semi-major axis orbits. So that's that's not a solution to this problem. And what I found, though, is that you can explain the observations really well if you just take that same simulation and apply comet fading to it. So I basically played around with some very simple fading laws and found that you can replicate the observations of the comet semi-major axes really well if you assume that comets fade from observability very quickly after entering the outer solar system. So just as an example here, so again, the red dotted line are my simulation results, assuming no comet fading whatsoever. The blue dotted line or dashed line is the same simulation, but I only count comets if they made 5 or fewer passages inside 20 AU. So basically what this is assuming is that comets fade after 5 or less passages. Comets will fade to the point where we can't detect them anymore. So this fits the observations really well. As you can see, but the weird thing is that, again, if you go back through the decades, comet fading has always been linked to water sublimation, but this can't be. Water doesn't care, or water ice is not going to do anything at 20 AU. So something else is going on here, and what that is we can maybe discuss at the end of the talk. I really don't have an idea. I mean, I think I can speculate a little bit. But so the idea, just pictorially, is that let's say we have an Oort cloud object, and it passes through the outer solar system somewhere near beyond Saturn. And on its first pass, it has a lot of activity, and we see it as a comet. Next passage through, something happens, and it's not nearly as bright, much less active, and we miss it. And so this is why we're only seeing Oort spike comets, and we're not seeing any kind of returning comets. So this rapid fading that I kind of used to fit the first plot has a prediction, because if comets can only make a handful of passages through the outer solar system before they're unobservable, this sets a really short timer for to find long period comets. They're only going to be, they're only going to be detectable for a few passages through the inner solar system or through the outer solar system. So if comets fade rapidly in the outer solar system, the ones we see, if we look at their perihelia, they have to be moving sunward and be doing so rapidly. The reason for that is if they're a slowpoke, if their perihelion is moving sunward very slowly, or if they are an oddball and they move in towards Jupiter and then back out, those processes take more time, and they would have faded away before we ever would have had the chance to discover them. So just to illustrate this again, let's imagine you have a comet and its perihelion is moving in really slowly. It makes, say, a perihelion passage near Uranus. Next time around, it finally gets into the Saturn region where we have a chance of discovering it, but it's made a few passages already, so it'll be faded and we're going to miss it. So we won't see that particular comet. Likewise, we'll miss a comet that has a much more complex perihelion behavior. So let's say it goes in much closer to Jupiter, makes a passage, and then comes back out and makes another passage. This one will have made more passages on average. And so we will miss that one too, because it will have faded over during that complex behavior. So the ones that we're most likely to see are going to have a fast and much more straightforward evolution in perihelion. So they'll come in fast in a single orbital period, make their first passage through, and then we'll see those ones. So the cool thing is that type of signature might actually show up in the orbital distribution of the comets that we know of. If we might actually be able to look for that signature. And so this is where the talk kind of gets into the weeds a little bit, because I have to talk about a lesser discussed orbital element, and that's the argument of perihelion. So in this diagram where the orbit of interest is the yellow orbit, the argument of perihelion is the purple angle right here. And that points within the orbital plane. That just points to the direction where the actual perihelion is. Because, you can have an ellipse, but it can be rotated in any random direction, and the perihelion will rotate, with your rotation of that ellipse. So the argument of perihelion just describes the orientation of the ellipse, or where the perihelion is in the orbit, basically. So the reason I'm interested in the argument of the perihelion is because of the galactic tide. So remember, the galactic tide wants to pull things towards the midplane of the galaxy. So I'm going to give you a little example here. And I'm going to use some simplifying assumptions. I'm going to pretend that the sun is right at the center of the midplane of the galaxy. And I'm going to put an eccentric comet here, or an eccentric Oort cloud object here. And I'm going to assume that the Oort cloud object spends all of its time in aphelion. That's, the 0th order an okay assumption. And in this diagram, the reference plane is the plane of the galaxy. And so we're going to assume that this orbit is perpendicular to the plane of the galaxy. So that red vector describes or points to the perihelion. So the purple angle is the argument of perihelion. In this case, it would be something like 45 degrees. So now let's look at what's going on at aphelion in this orbit. So this is the velocity vector of the object at aphelion. And if we break it into its components, into its in-plane component and its out-of-plane component, you can see that the vertical velocity vector is taking it away from the galactic plane. And that's in the opposite direction the galactic tide is happening, or is operating. So you have an acceleration that's acting in the opposite direction of the velocity. What this means is that over time, this orbit will lose angular momentum and its perihelion will decrease. Now let's rotate the orbit. So now its argument of perihelion is like 135 degrees or something like that. Now we can look at what's going on at aphelion again. The velocity vector points in a different direction. If we split it into its components, the vertical component perpendicular to the Milky Way, the VZ, that's now going towards the plane. That's in the same direction that the galactic tide is accelerating it. So in this case, the galactic tide will slowly increase the angular momentum of this orbit, which will cause the perihelion to increase. Now we can rotate the orbit again. And now the argument of perihelion is somewhere between 180 and 270 degrees. And if we look at the aphelion velocity, it's going, up and to the left. We break it into its components. The vertical velocity is taking it further away from the midplane of the Milky Way. That's in the opposite direction that the galactic tide is accelerating it. So as a result, the angular momentum will decrease over time and the perihelion will decrease. And then finally, if we finish this off, and we rotate to an argument of perihelion between 270 to 360 degrees, and we look at the velocity, the aphelion to velocity here, what we see is that the vertical velocity is now going down into the midplane of the Milky Way again. That's in the same direction as the acceleration due to the galactic tide. And in this case, the perihelion and the angular momentum will be increasing again. So basically we have 4 quadrants of behavior, and 2 of those quadrants have perihelion decreasing, and the other 2, depending on if the argument of perihelion points to either the other 2, the perihelion will be increasing. So if you actually worked out the math for this, what you'd find is that the rate of perihelion change for a given orbit is proportional to negative sine 2 omega g, where 2 omega g is just that twice the argument of perihelion measured relative to the galactic plane. So this quantity right here determines how fast the perihelion is changing, and it also determines what direction it's changing. So this is really straightforward to calculate for all these long period comets. So you can just do this and then look at what the distribution looks like. So I did that for the distant long period comets, and you can see that it is not a uniform distribution at all. So these are the values of 2 omega g for all these comets. And basically what you find is that they're extremely clustered towards a value of +1, which is as high as it can be. So the fastest your perihelion could decrease for a given orbit is if you have a sine 2 omega g equal to 1, and you can see a lot of these objects are very, very close to 1. So now we can compare that to what our simulations tell us again. And if you don't enforce any kind of comet fading in a simulation of comet production, this is what you get, the dotted line. It's not a good match to the observations at all. There's no strong clustering towards +1, and something like 28% of comets should actually have negative values of sine 2 omega with increasing perihelion. So that doesn't work. Now we can see what the simulation looks like when we just impose that same comet fading that I did on the previous plot. So we can do that, and that's the dashed line right here. You can see that it's better, but it's not great. So the nice thing about comet fading that I've imposed, it does produce a much tighter clustering towards +1, just like we see, but you still get a lot of negative values that just don't show up in the data. But we can play a game, because remember, I just kind of ad hoc made an assumption about the distribution of semi-major axes in the Oort cloud. What we can do is we can say, well, maybe the Oort cloud doesn't go out as far as we thought. So let's shave off the outer 10,000 AU, and let's ignore objects with semi-major axes beyond 40,000 AU. So let's only consider the stuff between 20,000 and 40,000. When we do that, the simulation prediction gets closer to the observed distribution. And then we can go even more extreme. And we can say, okay, well, let's only look at the stuff between 20 and 25,000 AU. When we do that, the simulation prediction gets even better. And so we think that what's going on here is not only is the second observed data telling us that fading happens, but it's also giving us a hint about the actual inherent structure of the Oort cloud. And so, and you can see this when you do detailed comparison. So I'm basically running a statistical test to see how well the simulation compares with the observations if we assume a different maximum semi-major axis in the Oort cloud. As you lower that semi-major axis, the y value on the x-axis the y value on the y-axis gets higher and higher. That means a better and better statistical agreement. And so what this tells us, and the reason that high semi-major axes orbits are bad is because to replicate observations is because when you're that far away from the sun, the arguments of perihelion in a single orbital period fluctuate around wildly. So it prevents you from ever having a tight clustering towards sine 2 omega g equal to 1, even if you impose extreme comet fading and assume that they can only make one passage through the outer solar system. So what we think is going on is, one, the observed distribution of arguments of perihelion tells us that comet fading is happening in the distant solar system, but it's also telling us that there's not a lot of stuff orbiting beyond like 30,000 AU in the Oort cloud, and Oort cloud semi-major axes of roughly 20,000 AU or even less are what is dominating the production of these comets. So that's pretty cool, I think. So we've learned something new about the inherent structure of the Oort cloud. We also learned something new about the recent history of the Oort cloud. So in our last bit of analysis, we assumed that the galactic tide what was dominating the dynamics of the Oort cloud. But remember, we also have to think about stellar passages. So stellar passages are different because it's effectively like a random process. You're just randomly throwing stars in random directions past the Oort cloud. So these can have varying strengths. So occasionally you can have a really strong stellar passage that would, dominate over the galactic tide, but that hasn't happened recently. If stellar passages dominated the dynamics of the Oort cloud for the last few million years, there's no reason you should ever see any kind of clustering in sine 2 omega g, because that's due to the effects of the galactic tide. But stellar passages don't care what your value of sine 2 omega g is. So this tells us that the galactic tide has dominated the dynamics of comets for the past few million years. So the past typical comet orbital period, which is a few million years. So that's really a fortuitous coincidence, and it's also valuable knowledge, because unlike stellar passages, the galactic tide is it's very easy to just write down a simple equation to describe how the galactic tide works. And this, since we know that stellar passages aren't that important, this allows us to kind of rewind time for a few million years and see where these comets passed through the last time they went through perihelion. So we can actually run the evolution of the observed comet orbits in reverse and see where they were the last time they came near the sun. And so that's what I did. And so what you're looking at here is you're not looking at a distribution of the comet's current perihelion, but you're looking at a distribution of the comet's previous perihelion, the last time they went through perihelion. And so what you see is that none of them have perihelion closer to the sun, like their pre-discovery perihelion passage was not closer to the sun. They're all much further away. So 19 out of the 25 known comets had previous perihelion passages beyond 12 AU. And if we look at the handful that had perihelion passages inside 12 AU, what we find is that all of these comets have smaller semi-major axes. They're all like 10,000 AU or less. And this is very consistent with these guys not being on their very first passage through the solar system near the sun, but maybe a second or a third passage where the Jupiter and Saturn didn't have enough power to like eject them, but they had enough power to draw down their semi-major axes somewhat. So what this all suggests is that comets start disappearing from view, like this comet fading starts to kick in at a minimum of 12 AU. If it didn't, we would see a lot of comets with previous perihelia of like 10 AU, 8 AU, things like that. But we don't. Almost all of them are beyond 12 AU. And so what I can do is I can use those same simulations that I've been talking about, where I've invoked comet fading, and I can take those simulated comets and rewind their orbits just under the influence of the galactic tide and see how well it compares. And that's what's done in the blue data right here in the blue line. And you can see that it's an excellent replication of the data again, or of the observed data. So just to sum things up right now, we have pretty good evidence, I think, that comets begin fading in the outer solar system. That evidence comes from their semi-major axes. It comes from their arguments of perihelion, and it comes from estimates of their previous perihelion passages. Now, in the plots I've shown you previously, I've just assumed the sample fading law that I've implemented just assumes that comets can only make 5 passages inside 20 AU before they fade. But that just kind of pulled out of thin air. We don't actually know the distance. There's nothing special about 20 AU. It could be 18 AU. It could be 24 AU. So the distance at which comets begin fading, as well as the number of passages required before they fade away from observability, those are effectively free parameters. So what I can do is, for my simulation, I can look at the semi-major axes and I can play with those parameters. I can assume fading begins at one distance or another, and I can assume a certain number of passages before comets fade away from observability. And I can see for each combination of those parameters how well the semi-major axes fit, how well the arguments of perihelion fit. And for each one of the constraints, those 3 constraints, I can mark out the region in parameter space where the simulations agree with the observations. So I've done that in these shaded areas. I've done that for the semi-major axes, the arguments of perihelion, and the previous perihelion passages. And what you see, the cool thing I think, is that all 3 swaths of fading parameter space overlap with one another. And the area where they're all overlapping, that is the most preferred parameter space. And what it tells us, that's where the simulations agree with the observations for all three of our constraints. And so what it tells us is that all the evidence suggests that comet fading begins somewhere beyond 12 AU. It could be at 12 AU or it could be at 30 AU. And comets fade after no more than 10 passages within this region, and as few as only 2 passages. And so just to summarize, long period comets with perihelion near Saturn have long been sought after because they're less affected by perturbations from Jupiter, and they're also less affected by water sublimation. But these comets, now that we know of a decent number of them, these comets show the same prominent Oort spike that nearer comets do. And in fact, it seems to be even more prominent. So the observed orbits of these distant long period comets are best replicated if you assume that these comets fade from view after only a handful of passages within 20 AU of the sun. So that's all kind of exciting and not expected, but it does throw a wrench in all these plans to interpret all this deluge of data from the VRC Rubin Observatory. So it's going to discover hundreds or thousands of these things. And it's not going to provide a straightforward Holy Grail or Rosetta Stone of like picture of the Oort cloud. It complicates things because we have to contend with comet fading in the outer solar system that we really didn't know existed. The other cool thing though is that we only see comets, these distant long period comets, because they are active 10 AU or 15 AU. So that by itself is unexpected. That's been written about for the last 10 to 15 years. And now that we've been able to characterize how long that activity lasts and how quickly it fades away, that might provide some insight into the actual nature of the mechanisms driving distant cometary activity. And with that, I guess I will stop and take any questions you have. And thanks for your time.
All right, great. Hey, thank you.
You're welcome.
We've got some questions are coming in. There we go. So first of all, I was reading your bio here, and it says you focus on the formation and evolution of planetary systems. How does objects in the Oort cloud kind of play into that? Or
yeah. I guess I am interested in exoplanet systems, but I'm mostly interested in the solar system. And I didn't talk at all about how the Oort cloud got there. But we believe that the Oort cloud didn't exist when the solar system first formed. And it was actually all the bodies in the Oort cloud actually orbited closer to the sun within the region of the giant planets. And over time, these bodies were scattered out by the giant planets, and most of them were ejected completely to like on hyperbolic orbits. They're somewhere floating in another part of the Milky Way, but a small fraction, due to the external perturbation on the solar system, get trapped into the Oort cloud. And so the Oort cloud's formation is actually tied to the formation of the giant planets, because these are basically leftover planetesimals. And we think that scattering process of ejecting things out into the Oort cloud might have actually been triggered by a dynamical instability within the giant planets themselves, so where their orbits rapidly changed over time. And so the Oort cloud itself, its formation is tied to the evolution of our planetary system. So I think that aspect is kind of cool.
okay, cool, yeah. That kind of ties into Chris's question here. And Andy, I promise I'll get to yours next. But so Chris is asking about exoplanets within the Oort cloud. Specifically, whether or not a object, say that's 10 times the mass of Earth, can have a tide of its own way out there in the Oort cloud.
So something like a Planet 9 is what you're asking about, maybe?
Chris, if you want to ask a follow-up, then you are welcome to. But yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, so the dynamical instability amongst the planets, the giant planets that I just talked about that might have actually coincided with the formation of the Oort cloud, it's thought that at least one planet was ejected during that process, perhaps more than one. So we might have lost something like a Neptune mass planet, or maybe even 2 10-Earth mass planets or something like that. And so just like most of the small ejected planetesimals just leave the solar system on hyperbolic orbits, that's probably the case for any ice giant type, like a 10-Earth mass planet or something. So it's going to obey kind of the same scattering laws. So it could have gotten trapped in the Oort cloud, but for any given object, there's about a 95% chance it'll get ejected, maybe about a 5% chance it will get trapped in the Oort cloud. So that's true for like a kilometer-sized body or a 10-Earth mass body. But if you eject enough of them, you're going to eventually capture one. That's why we have an Oort cloud today. The question is, did we have, I don't think we probably didn't have 20 planetary mass bodies that would give us the expectation to have one in the Oort cloud today. But you never know. I mean, you could have one, and certainly there are people that believe that Planet 9 exists, like a 10-Earth mass planet orbiting at several hundred AU, and that's totally plausible. And I've done some simulations as well as others have. So the question is, if you had an object like that in the Oort cloud, would it show up in the long period comet statistics? Would it change the dynamics of producing long period comets? And the answer is no, sadly. So if you have something like a 10-Earth mass body, it's not going to be able to kick enough objects into low perihelion to really distort the comet catalog. If you had a Jupiter mass body, you might get a signal. The problem with that is that there's this NASA WISE mission a few years ago that imaged the entire sky in the infrared. And if a Jupiter mass body was there, it should have been found. So we can kind of rule out that size planet in the Oort cloud, but you can't rule out like a 10 or 20 Earth mass body. But it wouldn't alter the global dynamics of the Oort cloud much, unfortunately.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Andy here has a question about cycles of comets. So, can we expect more larger and brighter comets over, say, the next 50 years, or maybe small or dimmer ones? Is there a cycle of comets like that, where you have a period of time where there's bigger and brighter and then smaller and dimmer?
Yeah, I mean, so on human time scales, I don't think there is, because the orbits of these things are like new long period comets have orbital periods of like over 1 million years. And the processes that drive them into the inner solar system operate on tens of millions of years. But I could think of a couple exceptions to that. One is if a comet has fragmented, you could imagine a stream of smaller bodies coming in over the period of decades. I don't think that's ever been seen, but it seems like plausible to me. But the other exception to that is you do get, while we don't expect fluctuations on like decade timescales, we do expect fluctuations on timescales of tens of millions of years. And the reason is kind of what I touched on in this talk. The galactic tide is a very predictable perturbation, but stellar passages are much less predictable. And so most stellar passages will be weak. But occasionally you'll have a star come by that comes very close to the sun, say within 1,000 or 2,000 AU. That delivers such a strong perturbation on the Oort cloud that effectively anything is capable of any semi-major axis can hop over the Jupiter barrier and into the inner solar system. And so all of a sudden the inner solar system goes from getting exposed to like the stuff at 20,000 AU to getting exposed to things not only at 20,000 AU, but at 10,000 AU, at 5,000 AU. And so these events are called Comet Showers. And the flux of comets from the Oort cloud can go up by a factor of 10 or even 100 for like 1 million years. And in the late 80s, these were written about as a potential source of cause of mass extinctions in the fossil record. But if you want to cause a mass extinction with a comet shower, you need about 100 times more bodies orbiting in the inner 10,000 AU of the Oort cloud than you do than we currently see from the long period comets coming from the outer 20,000 AU. And our best guess is that instead of 100 times more bodies in that region, there's like 1 or 2 times more. So it's probably, I mean, you certainly get a big jump in the production of long period comets, but probably not enough to like kill the dinosaurs or something like that.
Okay. Well, while we're waiting for any more questions to come in, Eileen, do you have anything?
I had, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I had one question, is that has spectroscopy, have any spectroscopic analyses been done on these short and long period comets? Do they show any major differences between them?
Yeah, there's been a lot of spectroscopy done. And that's kind of the frustrating thing from my perspective. This is getting less or more into stuff I know less about, because I like to think of these things as test particles on orbits. but right, they're real. They're made of real things. But there's no strong trend that I've seen with any particular molecule or any element. There's no strong trend of abundance versus dynamical class of comet. Now, I think there are differences between short period comets and long period comets, but amongst long period comets, the abundances are all over the place. So they're different. One comet to the next is different, but there's no correlation, it doesn't seem like, with orbits, which is very confusing. I don't really know what to make of that, and I don't think anybody does.
Interesting.
We've got a question here from James. What is the distribution of ices of different ices in newer comets? So nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and what effect does that composition have on us being able to see those comets?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the ones that come in the inner few AU of the solar system, the coma are water dominated. Like, it is really all water sublimation. But if you look at the stuff that's been recently discovered out near Saturn, so there's hints that the activity, I mean, we don't know the exact composition of the ice. The only thing in the nucleus, the only thing we can see is in the coma, and the coma of these things are really weak because they're far away. But we have been able to detect carbon monoxide. And that makes sense because that's a substance that will be frozen at like, in the Oort cloud, but it will start to sublimate at tens of AU. And so there's carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, ammonia ice. These are all referred to as super volatiles, things that sublimate at very low temperatures. So I think carbon monoxide might be the best guess for what's driving some of this activity. But these are just substances that, these are things that have been identified in the coma, but we don't know what's, the exact chemical makeup of the nuclei, because we only see what's sublimating, and we don't know for sure what is driving the actual activity, because it could actually be not just some specific species that's being sublimated, but it could be like there's an idea that water ice could actually still be driving this, but at very low temperatures, ice can exist in different crystallization states. So there's normal crystalline ice, but then there's also called amorphous ice. And you should get a phase transition from amorphous ice to crystalline ice at like 10 to 20 AU in the solar system. When you get that phase transition, your water ice still stays water ice, but it releases heat, and that heat could vaporize things like CO or ammonia ice. So you asked about specific compositions. I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows, but these are the types of things that have been identified and maybe are thought to drive some of the activity and maybe the fading of these comets as well. And so over time, I can imagine a comet fading if all of its surface amorphous ice has transitioned to crystalline ice, or if it's lost all of its surface CO or something like that. But the weird thing is we see new long period comets come in the inner solar system, and they still show CO. So I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? I don't see any more.
Andy had a question.
okay.
Well, there's a few. What's the relationship between comets and centaurs?
I need to refresh.
Oh yeah. So the relationship between comets and centaurs those are the relationship there is most centaurs are actually related to short period comets. So generally centaurs are bodies orbiting between Jupiter and Saturn, and but not in the inner solar system, and they're on unstable orbits, and they have generally kind of low inclinations, lowish, like 10, 20, 30 degrees. And we believe that those are kind of transition objects from the Kuiper belt, which produces short period comets, to short period comets in the inner solar system. So the process that produces short period comets is basically quasi-stable, quasi-unstable portions of the Kuiper belt leak into the giant planets over the course of billions of years. And on their way in, their dynamical control is handed off from one giant planet to the next. And basically centaurs, you're kind of catching the transition of Kuiper belt objects becoming short period comets. But there are a few oddball centaurs that are extreme inclinations, so like 105 degrees. And it's thought that maybe those could be driven in from the Oort cloud. So you could have an Oort cloud object get injected at a very high inclination, and the giant planet shrink down its orbit. But those are more the exception than the rule.
And there's one more question from Andy. Is the torrid stream really dangerous, or is it overhyped?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe somebody else can answer that. Sorry for my ignorance.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, I don't see any more. Okay. Well, hey, thank you for joining us tonight. That was really cool. If we want to read more or see more of your research and what you've done, is there somewhere that we can go to get more
Nate
of you?
gave me a list of certain publications.
Oh yeah.
Are they available on the internet, Nate?
Oh, yeah, they are.
Okay,
Every paper I write
I can forward that.
Every paper I write appears in a journal that asks for a lot of money to have a subscription, but you can also post copies of these on free preprint copies on Archive. And so you can get any of my papers on archive.org, arxiv.org.
I have, this is completely separate, but I have heard that you can pay for a paper from one of these journals that charge a lot, or you can just send an email to the author, and usually they'll just send it to you. I don't know if that's true, but I think I read that on Twitter. So who knows?
It is.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Eileen.
I was going to say there's another service that I'll put online for people. It's called Astrobytes. And Astrobytes is really at the level of what I would call the OKC Astronomy Club, but it's written by probably graduate students for the most part, postdocs, people, young professors, and then anybody else. But they're summaries of the research coming out today. And then they have links to other places that people want to go. But Astrobytes has been my best tool to learn more.
Yeah, that's a really useful service for sure. I've used it before myself. Yeah. But yeah, that's 100% true. If you email the author there, I'd say like 90% will just send you a copy of the paper. At least 90%. I mean, I know I would.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that's good to know.
There was
Yeah.
one more question that I
Oh.
think we missed, and it was just a comment. It was Schumacher leaving 9 was, let's see, the
Oh.
thing is keeps popping
Oh,
up.
a
Was a stream of
stream.
comets from a fragmented larger comet. But
Yes.
that wouldn't that have been a short period comet?
I'm pretty sure that was a short period comment. I'm almost certain it was. But yeah, it was actually one comet initially. But I got to look it up now. Yeah, it had an orbital period of 18 years. But anyways, it was one comet initially, but it was shredded by Jupiter's tidal field before it impacted with Jupiter. So it became a stream of comets on the way toward impacting Jupiter.
So that's good.
So through that, we learned that comets structurally don't have too much integrity too, because it didn't take much tidal force to pull it apart into lots of different bodies.
We also saw that the impacts were significant, and it gave credence to what was happening with impact theory on Earth,
For sure. Yeah, it was very cool.
And of course gave rise to some cult favorites of Armageddon and Deep Impact.
That's
and
right.
Things like that. Those
Yeah.
are great movies, so I still like them.
Yeah.
So they're fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Nate, sorry, Dr. Cabe.
Oh, that's fine.
Ought to be professional here. Hey, thank you so much for sticking around and chatting with us, and thank you for that great presentation.
You're very welcome, and thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
This is going to be up on YouTube later. I believe that you have given us our blessing for that. If not, I'll have to edit out where I said that. So, so you are welcome to stick around for the rest of the meeting as I wrap up stuff. But hey, thanks for joining us.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I'm actually going to head out because I have a
Okay.
couple things to take care of before I go to bed. I'm an hour later than you guys, but
Oh, sure, yeah. All right. Well, hey, thanks for talking to us.
thank you very much. All right. Have a good rest of your meeting. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you again, Dr. Cabe. That was really cool. I feel like I have a lot of questions about what he talked about, but I'm not smart enough to know how to ask them. So maybe I'll read his papers and then I'll get my high answers anyway. Anyway. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to run through some stuff here at the very end. Remember that tomorrow night is a novice session, weather permitting. Keep an eye on those dates for Cheddar Ranch, and I saw that Eileen had posted some great information about the Messier marathon in the YouTube chat, so be sure you scroll up and take a look at that. If you want to ask us a question or go to our website, we are at okcastroclub.com, and you can ask us questions at info@okcastroclub.com. I'm going to switch over to, and that is our website. And you can, this is where you can go to find all our stuff. Here is our club calendar with all of our events. Looks, if it loads, of course, this is the one that I didn't have pre-loaded when I started this, but here you can see not only our events, which are in green, but lots of other events like webinars that are put on by NASA. Really cool stuff. I especially am interested in this amateur astronomy series that is being put on by the Kalamazoo Club. There are 5 parts, and it's just about how to get started. Sounds great. Also on our website, be sure to check out our discussion forum. Here you can find all sorts of news and information about what we're doing and when. Calls for volunteers if you want to help out. Be sure to check this forum if you want to go out to Stanley Draper tomorrow and make sure it's happening. It doesn't look like it's going to be cloudy, but it might be cold. So before you drive out there, be sure you to check the forum or on Facebook, I'm sure, and just make sure it's happening. And while I'm on the forum, prior to the meeting, Eileen had told me that she posted something that she wanted to talk about. So Eileen, are you still there?
Yeah, Danny, can you share my screen?
Absolutely.
Can you see, it says beginner 1 at the top?
I only see you. I don't see your screen.
Okay, let's see what I have to do. Well, let me just tell you a little bit about what we have going on. We're trying out, there's obviously a tremendous interest in astrophotography in the club, but we have people at so many different levels. So we have a post on the discussion forum under the general club discussion that asks who's interested and who would be willing to help. We have it broken down into beginner 1 and beginner 2. Beginner 1 needs info. Just how the heck do you get started? And it tells, you know, we have Andy's put up information about what equipment you would need. Beginner 2, you have the basic equipment, but you need hands-on information to perform basic wide field astronomy. And then after that, what we have is some advanced sessions. And the idea is that these workshops would be probably held at CRO, and we would get you paired with people who are actually doing it. And you would do it because when you listen to a presentation, it all seems so easy. And then you got to do it on your own, and it's mud. So advanced 1 you'd need information regarding equipment, how to perform deep sky astrophotography and the equipment needed. Astro 2, you have the basic equipment, but you require hands-on information to perform deep sky astrophotography. And advanced 3, you can operate at levels 1 and 2, but you need hands-on help to process images. And then along with that, we're looking at, once we get to that point, is image processing at the different levels, and simple stacking, advanced stacking with calibration frames, simple stretching, levels and curves, noise reduction, star reduction, advanced processing with PixInsight and Photoshop. And I'm going to throw in Image J. But these are ideas. So find the link. It's easy to plan when we know how many people we are planning for, and we'll come up with some kind of a calendar for people to do this. This would be probably over the next 6-7 months that we would work these things into, from presentations to actual hands-on workshops. So check the discussion forum. It has lots of great information, and I hope we get some responses. Thank you.
Yeah, I found the post and I pasted the link, I believe, into chat. So I think
Okay.
that's it. But yeah, be sure to join the forum and introduce yourself and talk to us and ask questions and tell us what you are interested in. It's free, so why not? Also linked to our website here, we have our newsletter. of course, since I'm the editor, I feel like I have to plug this thing. But here is kind of an easy to use place to go to rewatch that video of Chuck, or to get some information about our speaker, or to see some upcoming events. And we link some of the webinars that you can go see, and then there are some club links to join online, or to get merchandise, or that sort of thing. So with that, I believe that is all for this month. Thank you all so much for coming and sticking around, and hanging out with us. Thanks to Eileen and to Dr. Cabe. Eileen has been our program director for 2 months, and she's batting 1,000. Both have been great. The one for March looks great, and Dr. Cabe gave a great talk. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to stick around for a few minutes to see if anyone has questions. If you missed the beginning of this, or you want to watch some part of it again, these will be live on these will be replayable on YouTube sometime this evening, later, however long it takes to process. So until then, see you later. I hope you go out and see some cool stuff. So till next time. Bye.
Bye. Good night.